The heat of Miami felt like a damp slap across the face the moment I stepped out of the taxi in front of the vintage Art Deco building in South Beach. My suitcases seemed to weigh double what they actually did, loaded not just with clothes I used to hide myself, but with the failure of a toxic relationship and a humiliating layoff that had brought me back to square one at 25 years old. The doorman, a friendly older gentleman, opened the wrought iron gate with a reverence that certainly wasn't for me, but for the guest I represented. The lobby smelled of old wax and ocean salt, a scent that clung to my sweaty skin and made me feel even more inadequate inside my baggy band t-shirt and the black yoga pants I wore religiously to cover my hips. I didn't want to be there, depending on the charity of my mother's best friend, but I had nowhere else to run. The elevator rose with a gentle jolt to the 8th floor, and I used the seconds of solitude to try and wipe the sweat from my forehead with my sleeve, praying I didn't look as sloppy as I felt. When the solid wood door opened, before I could even ring the bell, I was face to face with her. Victoria looked nothing like the mental image I had of the women from my mother's church group, women bowed by the weight of guilt and grandchildren. She stood in the doorway, erect as a marble statue, wearing a crisp white linen shirt and beige tailored trousers that revealed her slender ankles. Her platinum hair, in a short modern cut that defied gravity, shone in the natural light flooding the apartment behind her. She analyzed me over the rim of her thick, dark reading glasses, a look that seemed to scan every insecurity of mine in milliseconds. I instinctively hunched my shoulders, trying to take up less space, trying to hide the volume of my body under the gray, dull fabric of my outfit. Victoria didn't smile immediately, but she wasn't hostile either. Her expression was one of indecipherable curiosity. As if I were a book with a bad cover she was deciding whether or not to read. Her voice sounded deep and velvety when she finally broke the silence, telling me to come in and leave the bags in the hallway because she didn't want me scratching the original hardwood floors with the dirty wheels from the street. The apartment was a sanctuary of light and silence, with immense windows open to the palm tree tops and the distant blue of the Atlantic Ocean, where ceiling fans spun at a hypnotic, slow rhythm. There was no television on, no clutter, just bookshelves reaching from the floor to the ceiling, and designer furniture that looked like untouchable works of art. I felt like a bull in a china shop, my worn-out running shoes clashing with that wooden floor that shone like a mirror. Victoria walked to the open-concept kitchen with an irritating lightness, her bare feet barely making a sound, while I dragged my heavy, tired feet right behind her. She served me a glass of ice water with a slice of Sicilian lemon, a simple detail that in my house would be considered fussy. But there, it seemed the most natural thing in the world. As I drank greedily, she leaned against the marble counter and crossed her arms, observing me with those steel-colored eyes that seemed to see right through my oversized t-shirt. She asked how my mother was, but the tone wasn't one of concern, rather a fine irony, as if she knew exactly the kind of psychological torture Linda exerted over me. I answered in monosyllables, trying not to stutter, feeling the sweat run down my back while she seemed fresh and untouched by the tropical heat. Victoria commented that I had my mother's eyes, but the sadness in them was all mine. An observation so direct and surgical it made me choke on the water. She didn't apologize for the comment, just handed me a linen napkin, not paper, for me to clean myself. In that moment, I realized that living with this woman wouldn't be the cozy refuge I expected, but a constant confrontation with everything I tried to ignore about myself. She exuded a confidence I lacked in every cell, a woman of 58 years who seemed more alive and self-possessed than I had ever been in my entire youth. She pointed me to the guest room, warning that the bathroom was down the hall, and that she valued silence before 10 in the morning, because she liked to read her news, listening to the sound of the ocean. The room was simple, but had the same austere elegance as the rest of the house, with an antique iron bed and white sheets that looked like starched clouds. I put my suitcases on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the firm mattress yield under my weight. And for the first time that day, I felt like crying, not from sadness, but from pure exhaustion at being who I was. I looked at myself in the oval mirror of the vanity and saw the image of a scared girl with a puffy face and hair tied in a loose bun that screamed sloppiness. I heard Victoria's footsteps in the hallway and froze, afraid she would come in and see me in that state of self-pity. But she just walked straight to the living room, leaving a trail of lavender and citrus perfume in the air. Her presence in that house was so strong that, even in different rooms, I felt the pressure to behave, to straighten my spine, to not be the nice chubby girl everyone expected me to be. My mother had said Victoria was eccentric, but the right word seemed to be sovereign, a queen in her own castle where I was just a clumsy commoner. I took off my sweaty clothes and put on an even larger t-shirt to sleep, trying to create a fabric barrier between my body and that sophisticated environment that seemed to reject my presence. I lay down listening to the distant sound of the avenue and the waves breaking on the sand, wondering how I would survive the coming weeks under the scrutiny of those gray eyes. I didn't know it, but at that moment, while I curled up under the cool sheet, Victoria was in the living room, probably having a glass of wine and thinking about how to fix the slumped posture of her friend's daughter. Fear mixed with a strange admiration. I wanted to run away from there, but at the same time, a secret part of me desperately wanted to find out what it was like to be like her. I fell asleep with the image of her platinum hair shining against the window light, an image that would repeat in my dreams like a lighthouse or a warning sign. The city of Miami pulsed outside, full of life and bodies exposed to the sun. But inside, in that cool and silent apartment, I felt I was about to enter a war zone where the only enemy was my own reflection in the mirror. And Victoria, with her cold elegance and cutting words, would be the general forcing me to fight, whether I wanted to or not. I woke up with the white, relentless sunlight of the morning invading the guest room through the slats of the wooden blinds. A luminous reminder that I was no longer in my dark, safe refuge. The clock on my phone marked only 7 o'clock, but the apartment already seemed to vibrate with a silent, awake energy that made me nervous before I even got out of bed. I could hear light footsteps in the hallway, the muffled sound of running water, and unmistakably, the smell of strong, fresh coffee, an earthy aroma that invaded my nostrils and woke up my stomach. I lay there for long minutes, wrapped in the thin sheet, with my phone glued to my face, doing the only thing I knew how to do to calm my anxiety, scrolling frantically through social media feeds. I saw photos of former college classmates in perfect jobs, skinny bodies in expensive gyms, and happy couples, feeling smaller and more inadequate in that strange bed. Hunger eventually overcame the fear of facing my hostess, and I got up, dragging my slippers and pulling my oversized t-shirt down to cover my thighs, praying she wouldn't notice my deplorable morning state. When I reached the living room, the scene I found looked like it had come out of an architectural digest or a French art film, something too untouchable and perfect for my chaotic reality. Victoria was sitting in the caramel leather armchair, legs crossed elegantly, reading a hardcover book while holding a fine porcelain cup with a delicacy that fascinated me. She wore a navy blue silk robe tied at the waist, her platinum hair already slicked back, and the skin on her face glowed with some expensive cream that made her look 10 years younger. She had no dark circles, no pillow marks on her face, none of that aura of confusion I carried. She was pure clarity and purpose. She lifted her eyes from the book as soon as she saw me standing in the entrance of the room, and I felt that same X-ray passing through me, assessing my slumped posture and disheveled hair. "Good morning, Emily," she said with that raspy, calm voice, indicating with a nod toward the dining table where a silver thermos and some cut fruit awaited me. I sat at the head of the table, feeling like an intruder profaning that temple of order, and poured a cup of coffee, my hands shaking slightly under her peripheral gaze. The coffee was black, no sugar on the table, and when I took the first sip, the intense bitterness almost made me grimace, but I swallowed dryly so as not to seem childish. Victoria didn't eat bread or cheese or anything that came in noisy plastic packaging. Her plate had only papaya with drops of lime and some nuts. The silence in the house was a living entity, filled only by the sound of pages turning and the wind blowing the white linen curtains, bringing the smell of the ocean into that 8th floor. I was used to the constant noise of the television on at my mother's house, or the neighbors' loud music, so that library silence made me restless, exposing my thoughts that I tried to drown out. I pulled my phone from my pajama pocket instinctively, needing a screen to escape that oppressive reality, and started typing a message to a friend complaining about the heat. I felt Victoria's gaze burn over me again, and when I looked up, she was watching me over the book with an indecipherable expression. Perhaps pity, perhaps contempt. She said nothing, but closed the book gently and stood up, walking to the vintage record player that sat in a noble corner of the room. She chose a record with care, cleaning it with a cloth before placing the needle on the vinyl. And soon the smooth voice of Nina Simone filled the room, singing about feeling good and a new day. The music seemed to change the temperature of the room, making everything more melancholic and beautiful. And I felt stupid with my glowing phone in hand, a digital alien in an analog and sensory world. Victoria began to water the plants near the window, moving with a slow grace, talking softly to the ferns as if they were old friends. I watched her, hypnotized, noticing how firm her arms were, how straight her back was, how she seemed completely present in that moment, while my head was always somewhere else. I felt a sharp pang of envy, not of her beauty, but of that peace, that sovereignty of someone who needs to prove nothing to anyone. I finished my coffee too fast, feeling the caffeine race my heart, and murmured a quiet thank you, inventing an excuse that I needed to organize my clothes in the closet. Victoria just nodded, without stopping her care for the plants, and said she would go to the market soon, asking if I needed anything specific, perhaps something I usually ate. I blushed violently, remembering the packages of stuffed cookies and chips I had hidden in my suitcase, my secret source of comfort and shame. I shook my head, saying I ate anything, and fled back to the hallway like a scared animal returning to its burrow. I locked the guest room door and released the breath I didn't realize I was holding, leaning my forehead against the cold wood of the door and closing my eyes tight. I opened my suitcase and took out a chocolate bar I had brought from the airport, eating 2 quick pieces to calm my nerves, feeling the sugar explode in my mouth like a cheap painkiller. I looked at myself in the closet mirror while chewing, seeing the rolls of my belly marking the t-shirt, my round and pale face, and asked myself how I could live with a woman who seemed made of steel and silk. I felt dirty, heavy, and slow, a grease stain in that immaculate apartment, and my mother's voice echoed in my head telling me to try harder. But the worst wasn't my mother's criticism. It was the silent contrast Victoria imposed just by existing, an unfair comparison I made every second. I heard the front door open and close, indicating she had left, and the apartment plunged into an even deeper silence, now without her electric presence to watch me. I left the room on tiptoe, like a thief, and went to the living room again, feeling freer but also strangely lonely without her there. I approached the bookshelf and ran my finger along the spines, reading titles of philosophy, art, and classic novels. Entire worlds she mastered, and that to me seemed too distant and intellectual. I went to the window and looked down, seeing the boardwalk far below, the tiny people walking, and wondered if Victoria was one of those elegant figures walking without haste down there. The smell of her perfume was still in the air, impregnated in the sofa cushions, a mixture of lavender and something deeper, maybe musk, which gave me a strange sensation in my stomach. I sat where she had been, in the leather armchair, and tried to imitate the position of her legs, crossing them and straightening my back. But I felt ridiculous and artificial. The leather was warm from her body, and that residual heat caused a shiver I couldn't classify, something between maternal comfort and a forbidden intimacy that scared me. I jumped up, shaking my head to push away those thoughts, and went to the kitchen to wash the coffee dishes. trying to be useful, trying to pay for my stay with domestic service since I couldn't pay with charm or intelligent conversation. As I washed the delicate china, afraid of breaking anything, I noticed a note left on the counter, written in angular, firm handwriting in blue fountain pen. The note said only, "Don't stay locked in that room all day. The sun is good for the skin and the soul. I'll be back at noon for lunch." There was no signature, no kisses, no hugs, just the order disguised as advice, typical of her. I tucked the note into my pajama pocket as if it were a secret or an amulet, feeling a mixture of irritation at being bossed around and a little warmth in my chest for being noticed. I went back to the room, but I didn't close the door this time, leaving a crack open to the rest of the house, a small act of courage that cost me a lot. I lay on the bed and stared at the high ceiling, listening to the record that had finished, and the needle clicking rhythmically at the end of the vinyl, a repetitive sound that seemed to count the seconds of my slow and painful transformation. I was still the scared girl with chocolate on her teeth, but something in the atmosphere of that apartment, in Victoria's gravity, was starting to pull at my edges, stretching me in directions I didn't yet know. The rest of the morning dragged on in this tension of waiting, with the sun changing position on the hardwood floor, and me trying to understand who I would be in this new life. I knew I needed to change, that I needed to stop hiding, but the inertia of my low self-esteem was heavy as an anchor. When I heard the key turn in the door at noon, my heart raced again, not from fear, but from a new anxiety, a desire to see if she would look at me differently if I were at least dressed and showered. I ran to the shower, the cold water of the old fixture shocking my skin, determined to at least try not to be the disappointment I saw in the mirror, determined to face Victoria's steel gaze with my head held high. Or almost. I got out of the shower with my skin red from scrubbing, in a useless attempt to wash away not just the sweat, but the feeling of inadequacy that stuck to me. I wrapped myself in the thick, fluffy towel, the biggest I could find, creating a white cocoon that hid my belly, my soft arms, and the stretch marks I hated. The bathroom mirror was fogged up by steam, which was a relief. I didn't want to see the reflection of the clumsy, ugly Betty staring back at me every day. I opened the bathroom door cautiously, hoping to run to the guest room without being seen. But fate, or the architecture of that apartment, had other plans. The door to Victoria's room was wide open at the end of the hall, and the sunlight poured in from there like a spotlight, illuminating the scene that paralyzed me in place. Victoria was standing before a full-length mirror with a gold frame, wearing only a set of pearl-colored silk lingerie that seemed to fuse with her tanned skin. I stood static, clutching the towel against my chest tightly, feeling like an unwanted voyeur, but unable to look away. Her body wasn't that of a 20-year-old girl, and that was exactly what made it fascinating. There was a history written in those curves. Her skin had marks of time. Yes, small lines and textures that fashion magazines would call imperfections. But there they looked like medals of a war won. Her legs were shapely and firm, the result of years of walking or Pilates, and her posture was so erect her spine seemed made of titanium. She was applying cream to her legs with slow, circular movements, a kind of ritual of adoration to her own temple. I, who always applied lotion in a rush with the lights off so I wouldn't have to touch my own fat, was hypnotized by the care she dedicated to herself. Victoria was 58, but the vitality emanating from that room made my youth look like a tired disease. Her platinum hair, short and modern, left the nape of her neck exposed, a zone of vulnerability and elegance that gave me a lump in my throat. I asked myself, how can someone in the autumn of life seem so much more blooming than I, who should be in the spring? The comparison was brutal and immediate. I looked at my pale feet on the hardwood floor, at my bitten nails, and felt like a poorly done rough draft next to that finished work of art. Victoria wasn't trying to look young. She looked like something better, something timeless. She picked up an amber perfume bottle from the vanity and sprayed it into the air, walking through the scented cloud so the droplets would settle on her gently. A technique I had only seen in old movies. The scent reached me in the hallway, an intoxicating mix of wood and white flowers. And it was in that moment she saw me in the reflection of the mirror. She didn't cover herself. She didn't scream. She made no move to hide her nearly naked body. Victoria just sustained my gaze through the mirror, with a tranquility that completely disarmed me. Her gray eyes held no judgment, just a cold observation of my shrunken presence in the hallway. I blushed violently, feeling the heat rise from my neck to my hairline, and murmured a stuttered apology, ready to flee to my hole. But her voice stopped me, firm as a military order, telling me not to run, because running from mirrors wouldn't make the image disappear. Guys, just a quick pause here because the tension between Emily and Victoria is starting to get palpable, right? Before we see what Victoria is going to say to her, I have a special request. If you are getting chills from this story, go ahead and click follow on the Forbidden Romances channel. We are almost hitting our goal of 2,000 subscribers, and your help is fundamental for us to bring more stories like this. Did you subscribe? Did you share it with that friend who loves intense drama? So let's get back to the hallway. I froze, feeling my legs weigh tons. Victoria turned slowly toward me, completely ignoring the fact that she was in lingerie, and walked to the bedroom door with the naturalness of someone wearing a full suit of armor. She stopped 2 steps from me, and I could see the freckles on her chest, the real texture of a mature woman's skin, and that was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I had ever seen. She looked at my towel, which I clutched as if it were a shield against arrows, and then looked at my shoulders hunched inward. You are 25 years old, Emily, but you carry the weight of an 80-year-old widow, she said, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. Why do you hide so much? What do you think will happen if you let go of that towel and breathe? I didn't know how to answer. The truth was too ugly. I wanted to say I hid, because the world told me I wasn't thin enough, pretty enough, that I was the chubby, smart friend, never the protagonist. But the words got stuck in my throat, forming a painful knot. Victoria took a step forward, and, in a gesture that made my heart stop, touched my bare shoulder with the tips of her cream-cool fingers. "Straighten your back, girl," she whispered, adjusting my posture with firm pressure. "Chest out, chin up. No one will respect you if you walk around apologizing to the floor for existing." Her touch sent an electric shock down my spine, a mixture of shame and a strange pleasure at being touched, at being seen, even if it was under the lens of criticism. She removed her hand and went back into the room, putting on a white linen shirt over her lingerie with fluid movements. I stood there, breathing heavily, feeling the skin on my shoulder tingle where she had touched. She didn't lecture me about diet, didn't say I needed to lose weight. She spoke about posture, about attitude, and that destabilized me more than any direct criticism. She was telling me the problem wasn't my body. It was my cowardice in inhabiting it. I went back to my guest room shaking, closed the door, and leaned against it, letting the towel fall to the floor. For the first time in years, I went to the small mirror on the wardrobe and looked at myself. I tried to do what she said, puffed out my chest, lifted my chin. The image was still that of overweight Emily, with a round, scared face. But for a second, just a second, I saw a glimpse of another woman there. A woman who could be strong. I put on my usual baggy clothes, but they seemed to bother me now. Seemed like a disguise that was starting to get too tight on the soul. I heard Victoria in the living room, the noise of keys, the sound of her leaving for the world with her unshakable confidence. I wanted that. I wanted that strength. And, with a pit in my stomach, I realized I would do anything for her to look at me again, not with pity, but with that recognition I saw for a brief instant in the mirror. Class had started, and I was terrified. The golden tranquility of the afternoon was interrupted by the shrill ring of my cell phone on the coffee table, a sound that made my heart race in a conditioned reflex of guilt. The screen showed my mother's name, and I felt that familiar tightness in my stomach, the childish fear of doing something wrong even without having done anything. Victoria, who was arranging a bouquet of tropical flowers in the living room with the calm of someone who has all the time in the world, just raised a perfectly drawn eyebrow and made a slight gesture with her hand for me to answer, returning her attention to the heliconia stems. I ran to the hallway, seeking a bit of privacy, and answered with a trembling voice, trying to sound happier and more resolved than I really was. Linda's voice on the other end of the line was a whirlwind of anxiety and suffocating affection. She didn't ask how I was feeling, but fired a battery of questions about my behavior. If I was helping around the house, if I wasn't bothering Victoria, if I had remembered not to leave wet towels on the bed. I tried to answer calmly, saying everything was fine, that Victoria was great, but my mother soon entered the usual minefield. With that conspiratorial whisper tone, she asked if I was watching my mouth, reminding me that Victoria had always been very elegant and thin, and that I shouldn't be an embarrassment by eating too much in other people's houses. Those words, spoken by someone who was supposed to protect me, hit me like stones. I leaned against the cold wall of the hallway, feeling hot tears well up in my eyes. I knew she loved me, knew her concern came from a place of fear, but it hurt. It hurt to feel that, for my own mother, my worth was tied to the size of my body. I hung up the phone after promising I would behave, feeling like a scolded 12-year-old girl again, small and inadequate inside that immense apartment. I stood there, wiping my face with my t-shirt sleeve, trying to recompose the mask of normality before returning to the living room. When I turned around, I ran right into Victoria. She wasn't snooping. She was just standing in the kitchen doorway, holding 2 glasses of ice water, looking at me with an expression that wasn't judgmental, but of deep, tired recognition. She had known my mother for 40 years. They had shared secrets, youth, and pain. Victoria knew exactly who Linda was, perhaps even better than I did. She approached slowly, the sound of her bare feet almost imperceptible on the hardwood, and handed me one of the glasses. "Your mother has a heart of gold, Emily, but her tongue is driven by panic," Victoria said softly, taking a sip of her water while looking at nothing, as if she saw her friend in front of her. "We grew up together. I watched Linda stop living many things for fear of what others would think. The problem is she wants to protect you from the world by locking you in the same tower where she locked herself." Her voice held no anger. It held an adult, lucid compassion. She wasn't speaking ill of my mother. She was translating my mother for me. I lowered my head, ashamed she had heard, but Victoria placed her free hand on my chin and lifted it gently. "Don't absorb her fear, honey. Respect the mother you have. Love Linda. But understand that her insecurities belong to her, not you. You are not here to be the shadow of your mother's fears. You are here to discover who Emily is." Her touch was firm, maternal in a different way, without possession, just with support. I felt an immense relief, as if she had taken a backpack of rocks off my back. Victoria smiled, a rare smile that reached her eyes and changed the tone of the conversation with the speed of someone who dislikes wasting time with lamentations. "Now go wash that face. I know Linda. If you stand there crying, you'll end up agreeing with her. And I don't intend to spend the afternoon watching you mold inside the house. The sun has gone down. The light is perfect. Let's go down." She didn't wait for my answer. She turned and walked toward her room, throwing the sentence over her shoulder with that natural ease I envied so much. "Put on a bikini, Emily. And don't come to me with that beach cover-up that looks like a circus tent. Wear one of my shirts if you need to, but we're going to feel the sand on our feet. The ocean judges no one. I stood in the hallway with the glass of water in my hand, feeling the vibration of that affectionate order. Victoria had just neutralized the poison of my mother's words, not with a fight, but with wisdom. She validated my feelings without disrespecting her friend. I ran to the room to change, feeling for the first time that I had an ally in that unknown territory. An ally who pushed me into life, instead of protecting me from it. The walk to the beach was a silent torture under the 4 o'clock sun, which still burned the asphalt of South Beach as if it were noon. I walked half a step behind Victoria, trying to shrink inside the patterned sarong I constantly pulled to cover any inch of exposed skin, feeling like a fish out of water in the middle of that golden, half-naked crowd. Victoria, on the other hand, tore up the sidewalk with firm steps and chin up, wearing her immense straw hat and dark glasses as if she were a movie star from the 60s running from paparazzi. People looked at her, not because of her age, but because of the aura of power she emanated. She didn't ask permission to take up space. She simply occupied it, and the world could move aside. We reached the hot, soft sand, and the smell of the ocean mixed with sunscreen, and the salty scent of snacks invaded my nostrils, bringing an ancient memory of happy summers that seemed to belong to another life. I hoped we would stay in the back, near the boardwalk, where people like me usually stayed so as not to be seen. But Victoria marched decisively toward the breakwater. She chose a spot right in front, where the sea foam almost touched our feet, and spread her linen towel with precise movements, ignoring the looks of the groups of fit young people around. My heart was beating in my throat. I felt like every eye on the beach was focused on my cellulite, my belly, my excessive whiteness. Victoria took off her cover-up in a single fluid motion, revealing the 58-year-old body under the merciless Miami sun. She wasn't plastic. She wasn't artificially stretched. Her skin had textures. Her arms had the natural slackness of age, and there were small scars that told stories I didn't know. But the way she carried herself, with her spine straight and shoulders relaxed, made any imperfection irrelevant. She was magnificent because she was real and wasn't afraid to be. She adjusted her classic black bikini, ran her hand through her platinum hair, and sighed with pleasure, feeling the sea breeze, completely oblivious to my static panic beside her. "Sit down, Emily, or are you going to stand there casting a shadow on everyone else?" she asked, without opening her eyes. Her face turned to the sun like a sunflower seeking light. I sat down awkwardly, keeping the sarong tied around my neck like a protective cape, sweating buckets under the synthetic fabric. Victoria opened one eye and analyzed me from top to bottom with that gray laser. "Take that off," she ordered, her voice low but imperative. "You are on a beach in Miami, not a convent in Siberia. No one is looking at you, honey. The human ego is too big to pay attention to others' defects. They are all too worried about their own bellies to notice yours." Her logic was irrefutable, but the fear was irrational. With trembling hands, I untied the knot of the sarong and let the fabric slide off, feeling the warm air touch my belly and thighs for the first time in years. I sucked in my stomach instinctively, holding my breath, expecting someone to laugh, someone to point, the world to end. But nothing happened. The iced tea vendor kept shouting, the kids kept running, and the waves kept crashing. The world's indifference was the greatest relief I had ever felt. Victoria didn't say, "You're beautiful." She did something better. She normalized my existence. She just nodded slightly, like someone approving a student who finally understood the lesson, and went back to closing her eyes. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, and I began to observe the bodies around with the lens Victoria had lent me. There were bodies of all kinds, fat, thin, old, tattooed, flabby, muscular. And everyone was there, living, laughing, diving. The shame my mother had instilled in me, the idea that my body was a public offense, began to seem ridiculous before the democratic vastness of the ocean. Victoria stood up suddenly, shaking the sand from her legs. "Let's go to the water," she said, extending her hand to me. "The ocean cleanses everything, including stupid thoughts." I held her hand, feeling the firm, warm skin, and let her pull me. We walked to the water, and the thermal shock of the cold ocean on my feet made my whole body wake up in an electric shiver. Victoria didn't go in slowly, wetting her wrists as older ladies usually do. She dove headfirst into the first wave that came, disappearing into the white foam and reappearing further ahead, with wet hair stuck to her face and a wild smile I had never seen. She looked like a marine entity, a mermaid who aged and gained wisdom instead of losing beauty. I went after her, more cautious, feeling the water rise up my thighs, my waist, until a larger wave caught me by surprise. Before I could fall, I felt Victoria's hand grab my arm with surprising strength, holding me against the current. She was laughing, with drops of salt water on her eyelashes, and shouted for me to relax my body, to stop fighting the water. "The ocean doesn't care about your weight, Emily. The ocean only cares if you know how to float," she shouted over the noise of the waves, and that phrase echoed inside me with a double meaning that made me want to cry and laugh at the same time. I dove. I let the water cover my head, muffling the sounds of the world, feeling the salt sting my eyes and the coolness wash away the sweat and sadness. When I emerged, gasping and disheveled, Victoria was beside me, floating on her back with enviable serenity. I looked at her, at the immense blue sky above us, and felt a primitive connection with that woman. She wasn't teaching me to be thin. She was teaching me to be free. Her freedom was contagious, viral, dangerous to my old beliefs. We left the ocean dripping, skin prickling with salt, and the walk back to the towel was different. I didn't cover myself immediately. I let the sun dry the drops on my back, felt the sand stick to my legs, and for the first time, I didn't care if my thighs rubbed together. Victoria sat down and started applying sunscreen to her face, and I, in an impulse of courage, took the bottle from her hand. "Let me put it on your back," I offered, my voice coming out a little hoarse from the salt. She stopped for a second, surprised, and then turned, offering her bare back to me. My hands touched her skin, feeling the feverish temperature of the sun, the soft and alive texture. It was an innocent, helpful touch, but the intimacy of that gesture, right there in the middle of so many people, created a bubble of silence between us. I spread the cream slowly, feeling the structure of her shoulders, the strength of that spine that held up so much pride. She closed her eyes and let out a low moan of relaxation, a sound that made my stomach contract in a new way. We returned home in the late afternoon, with the sun setting and dyeing Miami in pink and orange. I was exhausted, salty, and messy, but I felt lighter than when I had left. In the elevator, I looked at the mirror. I was still the same Emily, but there was a sparkle in my eyes that belonged to Victoria. She looked at me through the reflection, adjusting her hat, and said only, "See? The world didn't end because you showed your knees. Tomorrow we'll do it again." And I knew, with a butterfly in my stomach, that I would go wherever she took me. Night fell over South Beach, bringing a cool breeze that entered through the balcony and made the linen curtains dance like elegant ghosts in the twilight of the living room. After the post-beach shower, my body seemed to weigh a ton, in a deep relaxation I hadn't known for years. But hunger dragged me to the kitchen. I found Victoria there, in front of the brushed steel industrial stove, lit only by the warm yellow light of the exhaust fan, which created dramatic shadows on her face and highlighted the silvery shine of her still damp hair. She wore a deep blue silk caftan, a fabric that flowed over her body like water, and held a glass of chilled white wine with the same hand that stirred a steaming copper pot. The smell of garlic sautéing in butter and fresh herbs was so welcoming it made me want to cry, an exaggerated reaction from someone used to eating frozen food in plastic trays in front of the television. I approached slowly, not wanting to break the spell of that culinary ritual, but Victoria sensed my presence without needing to turn around. She pointed with her chin to a second glass poured on the marble counter and told me to drink, saying that cooking without wine was just completing a task, but cooking while drinking was alchemy. I took the glass with both hands, feeling the sweating glass against my warm skin, and took a generous sip, feeling the alcohol rise quickly and loosen the ties of my shyness even more. I asked if I could help with anything, expecting her to just tell me to set the table. But Victoria surprised me by handing me a sharp knife and a heavy wooden board, asking me to cut the cherry tomatoes in half, but carefully so as not to crush them. The kitchen wasn't small, but Victoria's presence filled every cubic inch of the space, making it impossible not to brush against her magnetic aura. I stood next to her at the counter, concentrating on the simple task of cutting tomatoes as if it were brain surgery, afraid to disappoint her even in that. The silence between us was filled only by the sizzling of the pan and the sound of the knife hitting the wood, a domestic rhythm that, strangely, began to feel like the most intimate thing I had ever lived with someone. Occasionally, her arm would graze mine when she reached for the salt or pepper, and every accidental touch sent an electric current that made the hairs on my arm stand up, a physical reaction I tried to disguise by drinking more wine. At one moment, while I struggled with a tougher tomato, I felt Victoria's hand cover mine over the knife. I stopped breathing instantly. Her hand was firm, warm, and soft, with short, well-manicured nails, a hand that knew how to command. She didn't pull away. Instead, she moved closer, pressing her chest against my back to adjust my posture. "Don't force against the food, Emily," she whispered near my ear, and her breath, smelling of grapes and mint, hit my neck like a blast of heat. "The knife should glide. It's a caress, not an attack. Let the blade work for you." I couldn't move, paralyzed by the proximity of that body I had learned to admire, and that was now glued to mine in a way my mind couldn't process. Her scent, that mix of expensive soap, spices, and her own skin, invaded my nostrils and made me dizzy. I could feel her calm, rhythmic breathing against my back, while my heart beat irregularly like a frantic drum. She guided my hand in a smooth movement, and the tomato split perfectly in two, without effort. She released my hand slowly, but lingered a second longer than necessary to pull away, leaving a trail of heat where her skin had touched mine. I turned to her, still stunned, and found her looking at me with those indecipherable gray eyes. There was no explicit malice, but there was an intensity, a silent question hanging in the humid air of the kitchen. She smiled slightly at the corner of her mouth, a minimal smile, and went back to her risotto pot as if nothing had happened. But the tension in the room had changed texture. It had become denser, more palpable. I went back to cutting the tomatoes, my hands shaking slightly, and I knew she had noticed. For the first time, I didn't feel like the clumsy girl next to the perfect woman. I felt like prey before an elegant predator who was just waiting for the right moment. Or perhaps, and this scared me more, I was the predator discovering a new hunger. We finished cooking in a charged silence, where every gesture seemed choreographed. She asked me to grate the Parmesan cheese, and upon handing me the grater, our fingers touched again, and this time I didn't recoil. I sustained her gaze for a second, challenging the hierarchy of aunt and niece, and saw her pupil dilate minimally. Victoria cleared her throat, breaking eye contact, and said the risotto couldn't wait, serving the plates with agile movements. We took the food to the balcony, where a small round table was already set with candles I hadn't seen her light. We dined listening to the distant sound of waves breaking on the beach down below, with the city lit up at our feet. The risotto was perfect, creamy and acidic in just the right measure, but I could barely taste it, focused entirely on the woman sitting across from me. Victoria ate with pleasure, closing her eyes with each forkful, wiping her lips on the linen napkin with a sensual delicacy. I caught myself watching her mouth, the movement of her throat as she swallowed the wine, and a wave of shame and excitement hit me. She was my mother's best friend. She was old enough to be my mother. But in that moment, by candlelight, she was just a fascinating woman who made the rest of the world disappear. She began to talk about literature, about how books saved her after her husband's death, about how solitude could be a luxury and not a sentence. I listened to every word as if it were a divine revelation, completely forgetting my mediocre life outside. Suddenly, she stopped speaking and looked at me fixedly. "You have a grain of rice in the corner of your mouth," she said. I raised my hand to wipe it, but she was faster. She reached her arm across the table and ran her thumb over the corner of my lip, wiping away the imaginary or real dirt with a firm, deliberate touch. Her finger lingered there, brushing my skin, and I parted my lips instinctively, in a mute invitation that terrified me. Victoria withdrew her hand slowly and drank the rest of the wine in one gulp, her gaze darkening. "It's getting late, Emily," she said, her voice a little raspier than usual. "The Miami sun tires those who aren't used to it. Tomorrow is farmer's market day, and I like to go early to pick the fruit." It was a dismissal, an abrupt cut to the mood that was forming, but I realized she was affected too. She stood up abruptly, grabbing the plates with a haste that wasn't like her, fleeing the tension she herself had created or allowed to grow. I stayed alone on the balcony for a few minutes, listening to my heartbeat in my ears, feeling the ghost touch of her thumb on my mouth. The cold night wind gave me a shiver, but my body was feverish. I knew I should go to sleep, lock the bedroom door, and pray to forget that sensation. But the truth was, I wanted more. I wanted to go back to that tight kitchen and feel her body glued to my back again. I gathered the glasses with trembling hands and took them to the sink, where the running water wasn't enough to wash away the guilt and desire mixing in my blood. I lay in the guest bed, tossing and turning, the sheets feeling rough against my sensitive skin. I could hear Victoria in the room next door, the sound of her moving, and the wall separating us seemed too thin. Her image in the kitchen, with the silk caftan and the smell of wine, spun in my mind in an infinite loop. I had come to Miami to run away from my problems, but it seemed I had just found the biggest and most dangerous problem of my life. I was falling in love with the woman who taught me to look at myself in the mirror, and I had no idea if she was teaching me to live or preparing to destroy me. I woke up the next morning with a hangover that had nothing to do with the white wine we drank. It was a moral hangover, dense and sticky. The sunlight entering through the blind slats seemed to illuminate my betrayal. While I brushed my teeth, the image of the previous night returned in merciless flashes. Victoria's body glued to my back in the kitchen, her finger wiping my mouth, the look we exchanged. Panic rose in my throat. She wasn't just some woman I met at a bar. She was Victoria. The Victoria who had visited my house since I was in diapers, the woman my mother, Linda, considered a sister. How could I look at my mother again if I kept feeling what I was feeling? The guilt wasn't about sin or heaven and hell anymore. It was about loyalty. It felt dirty. It felt ungrateful. I was in her house, under her protection, and I was desiring her best friend. I decided, right there in front of the bathroom mirror, that I needed to build a wall. I would be cold, distant, and if possible, spend the whole day out of the house until this madness passed. I put on whatever clothes, not caring about aesthetics, and went to the kitchen planning to grab just an apple and run. Victoria was already there, of course. She was sitting at the table drinking her black coffee, impeccable in a raw cotton dress, reading the Sunday paper. As soon as I entered, she lowered the paper and smiled, a light, complicit smile that made my stomach turn. "Good morning. Sleep well?" she asked, the tranquil voice of someone who doesn't carry the weight of the world on their back. "I slept," I lied, dryly, without looking her in the eyes. I went straight to the fridge. "I'm going out. Don't know what time I'll be back." The change in the room's atmosphere was instant. The cozy silence turned icy. Victoria folded the newspaper slowly, placed it on the table, and took off her glasses. I felt her gaze burning my back while I filled a glass of water with a trembling hand. "Emily," she called. It wasn't a question. It was a command for me to turn around. I turned slowly, crossing my arms over my chest in a defensive posture. Victoria analyzed me with that frightening intelligence, as if she read my intentions on my forehead. "You're running away," she stated, simple and direct. "Yesterday we laughed, cooked, talked. Today you can barely look at my face and want to run out without having breakfast. What happened between the balcony and your room?" "Nothing," I answered too fast. I remembered I need to take care of some things. And my mom called again. I was thinking about her. Mentioning my mother was a low blow, and I knew it. I saw Victoria's expression harden minimally. She stood up and walked toward me, stopping at a safe distance, but close enough for me to smell her perfume. "Let's put the cards on the table, Emily," she said, her voice low and firm. "You are acting like this because you woke up afraid. Afraid of me, or maybe afraid of yourself. And you are using Linda as a shield. She is your best friend," I exploded, the tension coming out in a shouted whisper. "You've known my mother for 30 years. She trusts you. I am here because she asked. All of this closeness, seems wrong. It feels like I'm betraying the only person who ever worried about me, even in her twisted way." Victoria didn't back down. She sustained my gaze, and for the first time I saw a shadow of vulnerability in her eyes, something she rarely showed. "I know exactly who Linda is," Victoria said, pausing, "and I value her friendship more than you imagine. But Linda is not in this room, Emily. The ones here are the two of us." She took a step forward, invading my personal space, and I leaned against the sink, having nowhere to run. "I am not your aunt. I am not your second mother," she continued, and her voice went down an octave, becoming husky. "And you are not a child I am babysitting as a favor. You are a woman of 25 years. What happens inside your head, and what happens inside this house, concerns your maturity, not the friendship I have with Linda." "But if she knew," I started, my voice failing. "If she knew what?" Victoria cut me off, challenging. "That we cooked together? That I helped you see you are beautiful? Or that you are feeling something you can't name and are terrified of it?" I stayed silent. She had named the unnameable. "Loyalty to your mother doesn't mean you need to annul who you are or what you feel," Victoria said, softer now. "Linda lives her life based on rules and fears. I live mine based on truths. Don't use your mother as an excuse to hide from me, Emily. If you want to pull away, if you want to leave, the door is there. But go because you want to go, not because you think you owe that to her." She stepped away, returning to the table and picking up the newspaper again, ending the confrontation as quickly as it began. "There is fresh coffee in the thermos. And I bought that sourdough bread you said you liked. Sit down and eat. Or leave. The choice is yours, and no one else's. I stood there, heart beating out of rhythm. The mother card had been played, and Victoria had torn it up. She separated things. Their friendship was one thing, our coexistence was another. She treated me like an adult, responsible for my own choices. I looked at the door, then looked at her, reading the newspaper with that regal posture, pretending she didn't care about my decision. I pulled out the chair and sat down. I poured coffee in silence. Victoria didn't raise her eyes, but I saw a slight relaxation in her shoulders. I didn't leave, and by staying, I knew I was crossing an invisible line. I was choosing to discover what that thing between us was, even if my mother's shadow was still sitting in the empty chair beside us. The days that followed our conversation in the kitchen had a different texture, an electric calm like the air before a summer storm. The barrier of Mom's best friend hadn't disappeared, but it had become transparent, allowing me to see the woman behind the title. On a Tuesday night, the Miami sky collapsed in rain, one of those tropical storms that turn the window view into a gray, liquid wall, isolating the apartment from the rest of the world. The noise of rain hitting the glass was deafening and cozy at the same time, creating a bubble of forced intimacy in the living room. Victoria was sitting on the linen sofa, bare feet on the ottoman, trying to read a book of poetry, but I noticed she hadn't turned the page in a long time. She brought her hand to her neck repeatedly, massaging her nape with an expression of contained pain, closing her eyes tightly. Her always impeccable posture seemed to have yielded a little under the weight of an invisible tiredness. I was in the armchair next to her, pretending to watch a silent movie on the television, but my attention was all on her. Seeing the woman of steel show physical discomfort was something new, a crack in the armor inviting me in. I got up without making a fuss and walked until I was behind the sofa where she was. Her scent rose up to me, that mix of fresh shower and woody perfume that had already become my favorite smell in the world. "You're tense," I commented, voice low so as not to compete with the thunder rumbling outside. "May I?" Victoria didn't answer immediately. She let out a long sigh, letting her head fall forward, exposing the pale, vulnerable nape where her platinum hair ended. It was a silent, surrendered yes. I approached my hands cautiously, feeling the heat emanating from her skin before even touching her. When I rested my fingers on her shoulders, I felt the muscles hard as rock under the thin silk shirt. I started massaging slowly, using my thumbs to undo the knots of tension, putting all the gratitude and confused desire I didn't have the courage to verbalize into it. "Wow, Emily," she whispered, her voice raspy and dragged. "You have strong hands. I didn't know that." The compliment made my blood heat up. I continued the movement, sliding my hands down her back and up again to her neck, feeling the texture of mature, soft skin. It was an intoxicating sensation to have that powerful woman surrendered to my touch, depending on my hands to feel relief. With every minute that passed, the massage ceased to be just therapeutic. The rhythm slowed down. My fingers lingered longer on the curve of her neck, brushing her jawline. The silence in the room became heavy, loaded with everything we weren't saying. Victoria dropped her head back, resting it on the back of the sofa, which brought our faces dangerously close, but inverted. I looked at her from above, eyes closed, lips parted, breathing a little deeper than normal. I could see the pulse of the vein in her neck, life running right there under the skin. My hands stopped on her shoulders, but I didn't remove them. I stayed there, holding her, feeling gravity pull me down, close to that mouth that looked like a forbidden invitation. She opened her eyes slowly. The gray of her irises was dark, dilated. She didn't tell me to stop. She didn't make a joke. She looked at me with a devastating seriousness, upside down, and saw exactly what I was feeling. She saw the hunger, saw the fear, saw the adoration. Emily. She said my name not as a reprimand, but as a warning that we were on the edge of a precipice. Did the pain go away? I asked in a whisper, unable to pull away, my fingers squeezing her shoulders lightly. It isn't pain I'm feeling now, she replied, and the honesty in her voice was like a punch to the stomach. She raised her hand and, in a slow movement, held my wrist that was resting on her shoulder. Her thumb caressed the inner part of my arm, right where the skin is thinnest and most sensitive. It was a minimal touch, but one that sent an electric discharge straight to my belly. She didn't pull my hand to remove it. She held it there, as if she wanted to anchor me in that moment. The sound of the rain outside seemed to have vanished. I only heard my own jagged breathing and saw Victoria's fixed gaze, which seemed to be fighting a monumental internal battle between reason and desire. I knew I should pull away. I knew she was my mother's best friend. I knew all the logical reasons to run to my room. But the heat of her hand on my wrist was the only real thing in the world at that instant. I leaned forward minimally, millimeters, testing the limit, and saw her eyes follow the movement. She didn't recoil. The air between us crackled. We were dancing on the thin line separating affection from sin, and neither of us seemed willing to be the first to stop the music. Victoria released my wrist slowly and stood up from the sofa in a fluid motion, breaking the physical spell, but not the emotional one. She stood with her back to me for a moment, adjusting her shirt, breathing deep. When she turned, her face was flushed, something I had never seen. "The rain is going to get worse," she said, voice trembling, trying to recover the general's composure but failing miserably. "I think we better close the balcony curtains." It was a flimsy excuse. The curtains were already closed. But I understood. She needed a second not to do what we both wanted her to do. I nodded, mute, feeling my hands tingle with the absence of her body. She walked to the hallway, but stopped at her bedroom door and looked back. "Thank you for the hands, Emily," she said, and the double meaning hung in the air. "Good night." She closed the bedroom door, but didn't lock it. The click of the handle sounded loud in the silent apartment. I stood alone in the living room, with her scent on my hands and the absolute certainty that that unlocked door was the most dangerous and inviting thing I had ever seen in my life. That touch had changed everything. We were no longer guest and hostess. We were two women trapped in a storm, waiting for the first lightning to strike. "Guys, the tension has reached the limit, right?" The door was left unlocked and Emily is alone in the living room with this decision in her hands. Will she have the courage to enter? The continuation of this story, with the outcome of this forbidden romance and the arrival of Emily's mother, is coming out very soon. Stay tuned for part 2.